All right, now we're going to make it so this script can now change this score text right here. So when the can falls in the ocean, we get points, but the user wants to see that they got points. So we go back to the script, and we don't need this stuff anymore. That was just for practice. You can comment it out with Control-KC, and that will ignore the code, and you can go Control-KU, at least in Visual Studio, and it will uncomment an entire group, or you can hand slash these out, but we don't need these, so I'm just going to delete it for now. I'm going to leave the curly braces there so I can still do some stuff. So we actually need a couple of new variables. One is the text itself, and the other is the integer that is the score. So the text and the score integer. So we're going to make these public so I can drag and drop them in the inspector in Unity. And this first one is a really long name, Text Mesh Pro U GUI. So I'm just going to tab key on that because I don't want to have to try and type it. And going to name it score text. And you notice I'm using what's called camel case, where the first word is lower and all the subsequent words are capitalized. So that's called camel casing. It's a coder thing. Convention, that's the word. Public integer, and this is going to be our score. So this will be the score value, camel cased again. And next we're going to make a function. So let me just type one out and I'll explain what it's doing. So if I said public void, and you don't need to do this, but it's just to explain what it is, with parentheses and a curly brace. So if I wanted somebody to make pancakes, I don't have to tell them all the steps of getting out the griddle and the milk and the eggs and the flour. I can just say, hey, make pancakes. One statement, then we'll do whatever that is, but it would do all of these steps to make the pancakes, right? Which is a lot nicer because you don't have to name all the steps every time you want it to do something. So I don't want mine called this. I'm going to call this one update score, and we're using title caps on functions here. And so the score text is going to be changed whenever we run this function. So we need to tell it where that score text is. So it's on the object called this, and there's a property called this. And whenever we do a dot like this, so if we go back to Unity and it's checking my script, make sure I didn't make mistakes, which I have so far because I haven't finished the script yet. But on the canvas in this score text, so let me collapse that and go to this. When I say, okay, this score text dot font size dot font style, all these things can be accessed by doing a dot. So when I say score text dot, and then I could say font size, and I can change all those things that are in here. They're all changeable with code. This is just how you dive into those little things. So I want to actually change the text itself, and we're going to do similar to what we did in practice with variables. I'm going to say, okay, it should say the score with a space, and add or concatenate is the fancy word for joining some text together or strings. I'm going to say, well, give me the score value. So say score value, dot toString. Because if we just leave it as it is, as score value, it might yell at us and say, I don't know how to put text with an integer. Well, so we have to tell it, all right, this is an integer, yes, but I just want it to be converted to a string in that very moment, in that frame. So we have that, but now we have to go back to Unity, and on the score text game object here, the script is saying, okay, where is the text? Well, you can literally grab this and drag it in here so it knows which text to change. And then we could give it a value here, but it's going to start at 0 anyways, so we'll just leave that alone. Next, we're going to make a tomato spawner, which in VR, when you click on this, is going to spawn the tomatoes right here, right? So we need a game object to tell it where to spawn the thing. So I'm just going to create an empty, and I'm going to call this the mater spawner. And where is that? Well, it's currently right there. Let's say sometimes it'll like spawn way off in space somewhere. One little trick to move it to where you want it is position your view using WASD and the right mouse button. I want it to be about right here. Click the object, hover your mouse there, and do Control-Shift-F. And if I back up, it put it right where I was right there. No, I don't like the rotation because it picked up my odd rotation. So I'm going to go 0, tab, 0, tab, 0 there. And now, it's about right. Something like that. We can adjust it later. There's my mater spawner. And now we're going to make a script to go on that mater spawner. So when they click on this in VR, it's going to spawn a tomato. So let's make a new script. C# script, mater spawner. And let's open that up and see what we can do. All right, so above the start here, I'm going to hit enter a couple of times. And we need to tell it what to spawn and where to spawn it. So we're going to have some new variables, public, so we can assign them in the inspector back in Unity. And this is of type GameObject, tab key, right? There's integers, booleans, GameObjects, lots of fun types of variables. Variables are just a container that holds the information. And we'll just call this one mater. Actually, that should be lowercase. Mater. And then another one so that we can get the position of that spawner. GameObject, mater, spawner. And then lastly, we want to give it a vector3, which is a new type of variable. All that means is an XYZ, right? 3 XYZ. So vector3 is a position somewhere in this game world, right? And we'll just call this the mater spawner location, but we'll shorten it to lock. So the very first frame, we can tell it the location, this vector3 is whatever that position is, right? So we can say we're going to define the variable here. So now that I've declared the variable up here, it'll show up in my autocomplete. So I'll say, okay, the mater spawner location is equal to this thing position. So we say mater spawner dot. Remember, when we say dot, we're basically digging down into something. So I have my mater spawner here. What if I say mater spawner dot this? Then I can say that dot this. So mater spawner dot this component dot this property. So we do exactly that. Mater spawner dot transform, which is lowercase here, dot position. So we drilled down inside of there and we said, okay, that location, that's important because when we tell it to spawn a tomato, we're going to tell it to spawn it right here, which is where the mater spawner should be. So now we're going to write a custom function that we can run whenever that button's clicked. We don't need the update, so I'll get rid of that. But public void, and then I'll name my function spawn mater function. You don't need the word function on there. It's just an old habit because I used to really get confused by which is a function, which isn't. So you don't really need that on there. But public meaning other scripts can tell this thing to run. If it was private, you could only run it with a line of code within this script somewhere. And void just means when it runs it, it's going to do something, but it's not going to give you information back like an integer or something that you could use in some other calculation, right? So you could have these things the functions talk to each other and run things and get numbers and spit out those into new things. But we don't need that, so we said void, which is most common for the stuff that I do. And it's probably a good idea to do a debug log here that says we spawned a tomato. So we know that function is actually trying to run, and we'll watch that in the console when we play it in VR. And now we want to spawn the tomato, right? So instead of saying spawn, that's not really a thing. The fancy word is instantiate. So all that means is spawn something. Okay, so we need to tell it what we want to spawn, where we want to spawn it, and at what rotation, separated by commas. So what we want to spawn, well, this game object here, which is mater. And where do we want to spawn it? Well, at the mater spawn location. And at what rotation? Well, we want it to inherit the parent prefab rotation. So we type in this fancy word, quaternion.identity, which is just going to, whatever the prefab uses, it's going to use as its rotation. Save that. So back in Unity, we want to attach the script to the mater spawner. So I'm going to drag and drop that on there. So now when I click on it, sure enough, there's the script, and it wants to know these game objects. So I'm going to go to prefabs and say this is the tomato, and the spawner is this itself, basically. And this tomato, remember, already has a rigid body, so it will fall to the ground with gravity, and it's got a sphere collider. So there is one gotcha here. As of right now, I play tested it, and the laser pointer, the raycast, is not being able to click on the button. So if we go to the canvas, I need to add a tracked device raycaster. So if you type in tracked, there it is. I just left the values the same there. And now on the button itself, we need to say when it's clicked, run the function that spawns the tomato, right? So on this button, if we look down here, there's an on click. So on click, now all we need to tell it is where is the code that we want to run and what code do you want to run? Well, the code is on this object, so I can just drag the object in there. And now, remember, there's a script called this, and we made a custom function called this, spawn mater function. So on click, do this. So let's save that and let's test it out. So I'm in play mode here, and I can already click on that spawn tomato, and sure enough, I can spawn tomatoes. And if I look at my console, it says spawned a tomato right here, which is what the debug log is doing. Great. Now we need to make something that will know when the can falls into the water. So we're going to make a brand new cube and make it kind of a can catcher, so it detects when it gets hit and then we get points for it. So I'm just going to make a 3D object cube, and I'm just going to make it like 20 by 0.1 by 20 and plenty large, I think. We'll put it about right there. So to make sure that it hits that, and I'll make it invisible, which I can just uncheck this, but for now I'll leave it there just so we know it's there. And also you'll notice there's a box collider that comes with it. If I leave it the way it is, cans will literally bounce on top of it like it's ice, frozen water or whatever. But when you say is trigger, it's like when you walk into Walmart and the door opens in front of you, but you didn't actually push a button to do it. You just walked into a zone and it detected that. So by saying is trigger, it's making this big box just be a detection zone that will then trigger some other things, right? Let's move that in. So we need a script that is going to detect that. So we'll go to our scripts, create can catcher, and let's open that up. Okay, in this script, we want to tell it when a can hits this, go ahead and add 5 points and change the text so the player knows they got 5 points. So we're going to add one variable that's going to reference the text itself. So public game object score text, and we'll tie that together inside of Unity. And then we don't need the start and the update here. We're going to add another custom function, or actually we're going to use a built-in function called onTriggerEnter. So remember that the can catcher here, which I need to label, can catcher, has a collider that is a trigger. So we want to say when something enters that trigger, do something. So private, because nothing else is accessing this, private void onTriggerEnter. There you go. And it fills in what it's looking for, and other means the thing that went into that trigger zone. So we say, well, if the other thing is a can, give them points, right? That's the pseudocode where you kind of say it in plain English like you're explaining it to a rubber duck. And so if the other thing is a game object dot, and we're going to do something called compare tag. So let me type it in first. Compare tag, and it's looking to see if it is a can, and if so, do some stuff. Well, the tag here, you can tag stuff to kind of categorize them. So I have all these cans in here, but none of them are tagged. It's like putting a sticky note on an object. So we're going to add a tag, hit the little plus, save, go back here. I'm going to click and shift click the last one so I can tag them all. Okay, they are tagged as can. Excellent. So now they are tagged, so I can, in the script, say, well, if the other thing is tagged as can, do what? Well, we want to destroy the can, so destroy other dot game object. Oops. Semicolon. And then we want to change the score value, the integer, and run the update score. Remember this update score function? We can run this from this other script when this happens, right? When the can falls into it. So we can reference that object that we made right here, right? So that dot, and we want it to look at one of the attachments on there. The get component is going to do just that. It's going to say, okay, on that score text, I want you to look at, if I go here, let me collapse that. On this object, look at this component dot, and then look at the text. So it looks something like this. Get component. Well, what component do we want? Well, it's called scorekeeper cans, and you can see it suggested it here. So I'm just going to hit the tab key and empty parentheses because I'm not running or not feeding it anything. Dot, and then it has a variable that I can access called score value. And then what do I want to do with it? Well, I want to add 5 points. So the shortcut is plus equals in whatever number you want it to be, which could be a variable, but I'm just going to type in an integer. And we're going to do the same thing again, except we're going to not only change the value, we need to tell the player that they actually got points. So we need to change some text. So instead of changing score value, we can say dot, and what changes the score value? The score text is the update score. So I'm just going to run the function. And to run the function, you literally just name the function. And if you feed it any numbers, but we're not, so we're just saying run this function. Save that. Now back in Unity, remember we said we were going to declare something on here. Plus we probably should put the actual script on here. So the can catcher, I'm going to put on the can catcher. So here it is, and it's saying, okay, where's the score text? It's right there. There we go. And just for fun, I'm going to take this top can, and I'm going to copy its world position, because I'm just going to stick it over here, because when you test it over and over and over again, it gets old throwing tomatoes. So if you really want to test it fast, you could just put that over there, and when it falls into the ground, or into the, there it goes. It gave me 5 points. So you don't have to rely on your can hitting skills. There we go. So it is destroying the can and giving us points, which is awesome. So it works. And I could go to that and then click here and say paste world values, but I'm just going to Control Z to put that back. Control S to save. All right, cool. Now a little tidying up here on the can catcher. We don't really need this mesh renderer, so I'm just going to make it invisible. It'll still work. It just, nobody will see it, right? You don't want to actually see that. Next, we're going to make the confetti, so it shoots out of the cannon when one of the cans gets knocked into the water. So if we look in this ship and I expand that out, I think it's cannon right. Yep, that's that one. And there's all its little pieces in there. I'm just going to right click on that, and I'm going to create the particle effect as a child of that. So if I move the cannon, the particle effect will go with it. Under Effects, Particle System, and we'll call this confetti. And it is all kinds of wrong. So we're going to fix that. And I'm using a cheat sheet. You can use the settings I use or not. The cheat sheet is linked, called Show Notes. I call it the cheat sheet. This is going to be about 1.5, so they don't last forever. I'll leave looping on for now, but I will end up changing that. The start speed I used is 2.3. Start color is going to actually have some tab stops. So I'm going to say gradient, and then here, instead of just like clicking here and then add a color, then it fades from one to the other, I'm going to set this to fixed. So it's going to, I'm basically just going to make a bunch of little blocks here. And I'm colorblind, so it doesn't really matter. Double clicking on those. Lovely. Double click on that. Awesome. Looks great. And let's do this one. whatever color that is. Awesome. So now we got these very colorful little dots, and I want them to look like they are actually falling to the ground. So the gravity modifier, I use like 0.07, so it kind of goes poof down towards the ground. And inside the emission here, I'll scroll down. I want there to be a lot more because they're going to shoot out all at once, which looks a little bit better. And then the shape here. I'm going to collapse these other things for now. The shape is going to be a cone, except the angles and stuff are going to be a little bit different. I did this ahead of time, and these are the values I found that worked well. Radius was, well, 3 zeros and a 1. There we go. Radius thickness is 1. Okay. That's all there. Collapse that. Go to renderer. And material. Right now they're little circles, which doesn't quite look right. So if I hit the little target here, I'm looking for basically just a little white square. So I'm just going to go down to the very bottom, and there's a little white square. And they're quite huge. So we need to set the max size to like 0.03-ish. Max particle. Oh, whoops. Max particle size 0.03. Oh, 003, sorry. Alright. Doesn't look too bad, other than it's facing the wrong way. So, first of all, we gotta flip this around. Let's do a 180 there. And then we'll basically put it right inside the cannon. Can you imagine this is what people do for all games that you've played? Somebody meticulously put all these little things together to make the experience really fun. Okay, looks awesome. I don't want it to loop, so I'm going to turn under main confetti looping off. So when the can falls in, it should go pew. It's actually a little bit too long for me, but let's try that. Pew. There you go, you got cans. Woo. Now, to actually make it play, we're going to go back into the can catcher script. We're going to modify this just a little bit. After the can falls in, it does all this stuff. We want it to do one more thing, right? Which is shoot the cannon. So we're going to make a custom function and then call that function. So we're going to name it shoot cannon. And it's not going to run unless we have a function called shoot cannon. But where do you put it at? We want to put it outside of this on trigger enter, because it's its own function. So I know this is the start and end curly brace of that. This is the end of the whole script, so it's after this one. I'll hit enter a few times, and we're just going to make a custom function like we've done several times now and call it shoot cannon. And what should it do? Well, it's going to be a confetti. Well, we need a variable for it actually first. Public. It's not a game object. It's actually, the type is actually particle system, and we'll just call it confetti. We'll assign that in the inspector. So when we say shoot cannon, like when the can falls in, shoot cannon, all we have to say is the name of the system dot play. So it's going to play confetti, which is the particle system. So go back to Unity. So back in Unity, I'm on the can catcher here. It has this new confetti here, and all we need to do is drag in the confetti there. Let's save it, and let's test this thing out. With any luck, we'll actually be able to see the cans fall in. Oh, I forgot the play on awake is already set up. I need to turn that off. And boom! Can falls in, we get confetti. Awesome. The last thing to do would be, I don't want that confetti to play when the game first starts. So I'm going to go into this confetti and play on awake right here. We need to turn that off. Now we'll only play when the can falls into the ground or into the water. There we go. Fully functioning pirate carnival can tomato something. All right, have fun.